Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is the How to Study podcast brought to you by Ambiguous Podcast Solutions. Today, we are talking about how to plan out your very first episode. We've covered the basics of a podcast. We have talked about hosts, co-hosts, guests, editing software, and hardware for equipment. Now it is time to get into production. We are almost there. We're just on the last stage of pre-production, which is just planning out your very first episode. And of course, join with me every single time. It's my partner in crime, Christian Wright of Cube Recording Studios. Christian, how are you, sir?
Doing well, man. Getting some late night coffee. You know, about 8 o'clock drinking a coffee right now, but we're going to see how it goes. Need some energy for this.
Yeah, enjoy sleeping. So good luck with that. I always forgot your name because I was listening to old episodes of King's Rings podcast with the old Christian. And so I almost called you McLaughlin. That would have been bad.
Well, that just means I'm the new Christian.
Yeah, no, you're the better Christian.
Christian 2.0.
The Christian I always wanted. All right, so first episode. Your first episode should cover the basics. You want to cover the who, meaning who podcast, who is your podcast, the what is your podcast going to be talking about, the why you are talking about it, and you also want to establish who you are as a co-host, so the who, the what, and the why for yourself, as well as the podcast. Just, lay out the foundation, lay out the groundwork for why people should care about your podcast. Provide some background info on yourself, your expertise in your given subject, if any. So you might not have any, and that's totally fine too. But if you're a psychiatrist, you're doing a psychology podcast, lay out your credentials, lay out your master's degree, brag a little bit, brush some dirt off your shoulder, stuff like that. But also think about how you want to start and end your podcast. This can be a little tricky. So an example I'm going to give is a podcast that I hosted called You Mad Bro. And every single podcast started with me just pretty much yelling into the microphone going, all right. Everybody settle down. And Nash, my co-host, laughing because he never knew when I was going to say it. So the podcast was called You Mad Bro. And the basic premise was we are going to talk about whatever the internet is mad about in that given week. So the all right. It's like, okay, people are fuming, people are mad. It's like, all right, everyone settle down. We're about to get started and talk some real business. So that one was a little more planned. It was a little more, I don't know, Chris, what's another word for planned? It was a little more produced, I guess, for lack of a better word, for how it's going to start that podcast. Some of them happen completely naturally. My wrestling podcast, King's Rings podcast.
Conceptualized.
That's a good word. Conceptualized. Yeah. Will you go with that? Conceptualized. So fancy. So my other podcast, King's Rings podcast, I took something from Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon, as an announcer, would start Raw with, welcome everyone. So I did the same thing. King's Rings podcast, I go, and welcome everyone to the King's Rings podcast. I kind of picked it up again with talking with Tarashuk. And then this podcast, I said, hello and welcome. Sometimes just tagline can just be hello and welcome, at least until you think of one. Now, some of them can come up completely naturally and by accident. So back to You Mad Bro. One time, me and Nash were recording, and I just went, we'll be back next week as long as I gave a beat, and then Nash was whispering to the mic, you stay angry, right? So that's just something that tied the show together. It's something that was kind of clever, it was unique, and it added some familiarity to the show. Think of it as a catchphrase, right? Like if you're an old timer, think of the Late Show without the "Here's Johnny" for Johnny Carson. I think Carson hosted the Late Show.
It's like a tagline.
It's a tagline.
Yep.
Right. A picture Saturday Night Live from New York. It's Saturday night. Right. That's their tagline. That's what they're known for. It's what they're famous for. Certain shows have this. Certain shows don't. It's a stylistic choice I make because I think it adds something to your podcast. Across my time in podcasting, these have come naturally. Weren't necessarily planned, but it's just something to think about. And remember, it's completely optional. If you want to do your intro, it's like, hey, I'm Will Tarashuk. This is my podcast. Go for it. And if you kind of try some things out, like you're in episode 10, you're like, it's not working for me. Switch it up. Or you can go, you know what? That's a good tagline. I'm going to use that. So other than that, your tagline, think of like your intro and your outro tagline. You got to discuss major themes of your podcast. That can be the type of people you're going to be interviewing. There can be the genre of music that you're talking about. It can be kinds of celebrities you are profiling. et cetera, et cetera. It sets the tone for your future podcast. Let me give you another example. Completely made up. I don't know if this podcast exists. It probably does, but if it doesn't, you can take it. So let's say you have a podcast about the 90s sitcom Seinfeld. That's your podcast. You're just going to talk about everything Seinfeld. In your debut episode, you want to introduce who you are, who the show is, and what your show will be. And also the connection to the content you're covering. So maybe you're just a huge Seinfeld fan. Right? You know, you've seen every episode a dozen times, and you're just like the most famous Seinfeld person ever. You know everything. Seinfeld trivia, you got it. You won the first prize. You know, the first episode can focus on key themes and conflicts that ran through the series, iconic characters, iconic moments, etc. You can also set up future episodes, like, you know, in this podcast, we're going to cover the top 10 funniest moments from season 4, right? Or the top 5 characters of all time that only appeared in one episode. Or your top 10 characters of all time and make it a series. Character profiles. You know, today we're doing a full character profile on Newman, right? That could be one of your episodes. Fan interaction. You know, we want to have guest interaction on my podcast. So, like, if you have questions for me, put it on socials. You can follow here, and that'll be a full episode me answering your questions. Kind of give your audience an example of what your podcast will be and also what it could be if they invest in it as well as you invest in it. The point is that you want to outline to your listeners exactly what they can expect. Christian, anything you want to add to something like that?
I think having a tagline, it creates familiarity. These types of things, it makes it fun. You know, it's almost like they get to participate.
Yeah.
Because, you know, they could say something, and it's like, we're on the Daily Show, where are we? And then the audience goes, whatever, you know, the thing that you constantly say. It makes it more fun. It makes it more familiar. And then you get into it. So I definitely think that stuff is completely optional. It can be storyboarded. Sometimes it comes organically. Other times you think of it beforehand. So, yeah. But I think it's like glue. It glues things together.
I'm very much a person who does things off the top of their head. If you haven't found out by now, that's why I like kind of do things naturally.
You would think you did improv.
You would think I would have done improv. So like back to King's Wings podcast, up until episode maybe 200 something, until Ricky took over, the episode titles were not discussed until after the podcast because something would come up in the podcast that was just naturally funny. So that's what we named it. Like kind of like we do for Unnamed Nonsense, Christian. Like our episode titles don't really come up until after the fact.
Which can be what are we calling this?
Yeah, what are we calling this one? It's like, what do we talk about? Right? What were some funny moments? What would stick out to an audience?
What were the highlight moments?
What were the highlight moments? But also like my my closing line, but we'll see you then. We'll see you there. But until then, y'all take care. That was completely organic. That's just something I didn't know how to close a show. Talking to Tarashuk, and I just kind of figured it out. I was like, okay, I like this. And I stuck with it. And that's what I do to end every single one of my podcasts. And anyone I'm hosting. Until then, y'all take care. Because I do a lot of podcasts. I'll see you all next time. But until then, y'all take care. I do it that same cadence too. So, this little things as a host, find for yourself. Find little characters in your pattern. But back to my Seinfeld example. From there, you can actually go into your first discussion topic. So you can lay out your episode, and you can either stop there at like 10 minutes or so, or you can keep going and actually discuss the topic. So if it's your first episode, you want to make it big, so you have to do a big topic. You know, you could say it when you have an audience built, but maybe discuss your favorite episode, right? So your favorite episode of Seinfeld is a good introduction to the podcast. It's also something you're very familiar with. So if it's a Soup Nazi, talk about the Soup Nazi. It's really the only episode of Seinfeld I actually know. Or the challenge, where they all have the dare. I don't know. I'm not a huge Seinfeld guy. But boom, there's your first episode. Another example would be like an interview show where you talk to local comedians, entertainers in your city. So you would want to so let's say you are, or Christian, for your podcast, right? If you want to record interview musicians, right? Because you're a recording studio.
Right.
So the first episode would be a few minutes discussing who you are, your love for comedy, or in your case, music and entertainment. Establish your goal, right? So like my goal as an entertainment podcast, music podcast, is to help get these local artists some recognition and put their name out there. Someone's listening to that, they're going to go, oh, okay, I want to be a guest. I'm a local artist. Okay, cool. Maybe it's to help promote local talent. Maybe it's to get a peek in behind the curtain at a local scene. So, you know, I think a new album coming out, you know, what was the inspiration for the album? What were the technicals behind this? How much the budget?
Behind the scenes, anything. Entertainment. There's a lot of reasons, a lot of ways you could go with it.
But like, think of all the possibilities and just list them out on your first episode. Pretty much. And then from there, you can go to an actual interview. Your first episode is done. Then from there, you're off to the races. All right. So now, you got to do an intro. The art of the intro. The crux, the main part of this episode is going to be, how do I do an intro? We've gone so far into this series, we haven't talked about actually doing an intro. So the intro should always cover the basics of your podcast. The name, the hosts, or host if it's singular, the topics covered, where they can find you, any social plugs, and you can also include music or like clips from your podcast. That's optional. So after about 30, 40 episodes of the King's Rings podcast, I went through 2 hosts and we added a 3rd host. So it's like, okay, we need a new intro because we have new people on the show. We've also had an archive of past episodes. I always thought it'd be cool that in your intro, when you're introducing me as first Mike, you would cut to a funny moment or a clip from the podcast. So that's what we did. We did it for me, we did it for Dave, and we did it for Ricky. Now, the intro was a little long, but I thought it was really cool. I thought it was great edited, and I thought it was a lot of fun. So you can get creative with your intro, which is why I put music and clips to be optional. A music bed is always fun to include in your intro. Makes it more poppy, makes it more entertaining, and it's something your audience can connect with, but you got to be careful because you got to find someone who has music, or you got to use commercial-free licenses, or you can say screw it and not care and maybe get pulled down. So that's up to you. Enter at your own risk.
That's always an option. I mean, I think to kind of elaborate on that, think big.
Yeah, think big.
Think big. Maybe you can't do it, but think big first, and then get smaller if you need to. Your podcast is essentially a TV show.
Yeah. When
you're watching, a TV show, what is the intro like? Sometimes it might just be a 15-second thing, or think NFL. Dun, 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 dun. That just plays, and then it has a logo that unfolds. There's an overlay and all of these things, and then it starts. It's quick, it's sweet, it's to the point, but it's good. And these are the types of things that you see on television.
Yeah, and you gotta do it with audio. That's your only thing.
But you gotta do it with audio. And we talked about overlays a little bit, and the video aspect. You can do these things as well, just like somebody's watching a TV show. Captivate the audience.
Yeah,
visually, auditorily, if that's even a word. But you get the gist.
And there's essentially, in my opinion, 3 different types of intros. There's the cold open. There is the pre-recorded, and then there's a combo of both, which I am going to break down for all of you, but this so you can feel a little bit better about yourself, and also so I can pat myself on the back, I'm going to play for you guys my very first podcast intro on my very first podcast, the Kings of the Rings podcast. So this intro was recorded, well, not recorded, but it was edited and pieced together by me, and I definitely didn't use music. I don't think I'm still allowed to use. So it's a wrestling podcast. So I stitched together The Rock's WWE theme, as well as some like moments in wrestling, and some part from a Day to Remember song. But back in 2015, podcast was the Wild West, and I don't know if they're ever going to get pulled, but they haven't been pulled yet. So who knows? Copyright can be a little confusing when it comes to RSS feeds. But, Christian, play that intro for everybody.
Hey, yo.
You think you know me?
I'm so proud of this intro. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, people of all ages, welcome to the Kings of the Rings podcast, where we talk all professional wrestling. We'll talk WWE, NXT, TNA, and all the independent wrestling your little hearts can handle. This is a wrestling podcast for real wrestling fans. We are the Kings of the Rings podcast. I'm Will Tarashuk, and I'm joined every week by my main man, Christian McLaughlin. Together, we form the Kings of the Rings, where we make wrestling real. You name a ring, and we will sure as hell become the king. It's time! Oh, it's time! It's Kings of the Rings time! I love it.
I mean, the audience is hearing that for the first time, but so am I.
Yeah, what did you think? All right, Christian, you are someone who actually made intros. So I am 19 years old. I'm 18, about to turn 19. I made that in January of 2015, yeah. It took me about 2 hours to find the Rock's theme, to find those sound bites, and to because you can hear it, before my main intro comes in, I parted the audio down, and I parted it back up at the end, and parted it back down.
Right.
Stylistic choice I still use to this day. But for overall thoughts, what did you think of that intro?
I think this is a scenario where you, at its core, it delivered the message very well.
Yeah.
It did everything you needed it to do. Sonically, it could have been better, but because...
I was not good at mixing or mastering at all.
Oh, yeah, but because of the energy you brought and, the clever mashup of the different clips and things, I think it came across very well. It's like those artists that go viral on SoundCloud and it sonically just sounds horrible, but the music is good. The vibe is there. And I think you definitely captured the vibe, captured my attention. I was tuned in the entire time. So I thought it was pretty good.
I'm surprised I still know all the words.
Oh yeah, I saw you kind of singing along,
I was
doing
rocking
your little,
out, dude.
Doing your little Will dance.
I am so proud of that intro. I am so proud of it. I don't care.
I mean, it brought you look joyous, man, jubilant.
It's bad. I'm not gonna say it's good, but it's my favorite.
No, I thought it was a pretty good intro. I mean, if it was your own music, then that would have really sealed the deal.
Yeah,
it would just I'd be like, yo, let's remix that thing.
Yeah, well, that's actually Dwayne The Rock Johnson's WWE theme. So
is that you still use that to this day?
No. We have gone through many iterations of the King's Rings intro. We're gonna play that a little later on. Hopefully, maybe, of how we do it now, because since Ricky took over, it's a little bit different. But back to the actual intro. So that's the standard you have to set. I have set the bar for your intro, your podcast out there. So good
for
luck.
A first intro, that was your first intro.
That was my first intro, college student. That lasted probably that lasted about 40 episodes, 30 to 40 episodes.
I liked it. If I heard that, I would want to watch it.
Yeah.
I mean, you made it very exciting. And I'm not even a wrestling guy at all. But it made me want to tune in.
Yeah,
for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You can tune in. We're live every Wednesday on YouTube, on YouTube and Twitter.
We're still around. So
yeah, we're still around. 300 episodes later. So what is a cold open? A cold open definitely is a place in podcasting. They work for a certain type of show. Again, in my opinion, it can cover the basics easily and effectively. The only thing is it lacks that pop. It lacks that pomp and circumstance and the flavor it can add to your overall product. That intro I just played for you, that is all me. That is my heart and soul. And that's the kind of the attitude I wanted towards that podcast. But if you're someone who just doesn't have the resources to do that, you can do a cold open, which is just none of that. It's just you starting the podcast. At the beginning of this podcast was a cold open. It's a great thing for a beginner or for someone who is just learning. A cold opening should always cover the name of the podcast, the host, the topics covered, and where the podcast can be found on social media. So, a cold open means that there's no music, there's no pre-recorded segment. It can be as simple as, what's going on, everyone? I'm blank, and welcome to blank. Today, we're going to be talking about blank. That's it. That's as easy as it can be. That is a cold open. So, the pros of something like that, you just jump right in. There's no wasting time. People's attention spans are super short these days. So, if you don't want the pump and circumstances an intro, you just want to get straight to business, straight to the brass tacks, if you will, you can do that. So there's a pro there. It cuts down the length of your podcast. If you're someone who wants your podcast to be a crisp and clean 15 minutes, you don't need to waste that minute and a half or 2 minutes I played you on that intro I had. You can just get right into it. Especially if it's a daily podcast, right? But it's also the biggest pro. It's always an option, meaning you don't need to be an experienced audio editor to do a cold open. Or like if for some reason you're in the process of getting a new intro and you don't want to use your old intro anymore, you can just go back to it. You can always do it. It is old faithful. It's old reliable. Christian, any more pros you can think of for cold open?
I mean, I think you really went through them all.
Yeah.
You can get right into it. You don't have to boggle yourself down with like, oh, I need an intro. I need this. Like, I need a website. No, you don't. Just jump right in. Just get started.
Yeah.
And like you said, if it's already a shorter podcast, maybe you just need to get straight to the point and not. And if it's a daily podcast too, people are just they might start skipping it.
Got to.
So these are things to think about.
I mean, skipping it's fine. That plus 5 second button's there for a reason.
Right.
And I always keep that in mind when I'm creating content. But the cons to a cold open, it can be a little confusing, right? Because if someone's new to your podcast, it's gonna be like, well, what am I listening to? What is this? They need an introduction to your content. So you can still do that. It's just a little difficult and it's a little bland because you don't get to show off. You don't get to show off your show, meaning a well-produced intro can make an average podcast sound professional. Like it made me a podcaster for the very first time with plenty of audio issues. That intro made the King's Wings podcast sound way more cool than it actually was.
And uniformity.
Yeah, that too.
From one episode to another. Not to mention, instead of you're letting the intro do a lot of the heavy lifting for you.
Yeah.
Because, on the podcast, you might be saying what it's about. You might be saying this podcast, we're gonna jump right in and we're gonna talk about the hottest cars around. It's doing the intro for you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were visually showing people, but in this case, in audio, just letting the audio do the work for you, and then you can elaborate. But it's already kind of getting you a jump start, and you have to say a little bit less. You really just jump into the topic, or you could fade in mid conversation. Mm-hmm. If there's an intro that thoroughly explains what the show's going to be about.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of one of the pros. It does a lot of the heavy lifting for you.
Exactly. It hides your flaws too. But okay, Christian, let's do a sample. You and me. Let's do an example of a cold out intro. So you're gonna be my guest. You're gonna be Christian Wright, founder of Cube Recording Studios.
Split screen here.
So, you just gotta be yourself. So we'll do Talking with Tarashuk.
Cool.
And welcome everyone back to Talking with Tarashuk podcast. This is your first time. My name is Will Tarashuk. That's T as in Thomas, ARASHUK. And this is Talking with Tarashuk, the podcast where I, the founder of Cube Recording, the founder of Ambiguous Podcast Solutions, talks to anyone I generally find interesting. That can be authors, that can be musicians, that can be rappers, that can be life coaches, that can be anything and anyone in between. My guest today is the founder of Cube Recording Studios by the name of Christian Wright. And we are actually in his studio right now in Montclair, New Jersey. Christian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
See?
Even though this is my studio. Happy to have you here.
Yeah, happy to have me here.
Happy to have you here.
Right, so other than my flub of calling myself the founder of Cube Recording Studios, that is a cold open, right? It's
information.
It's information. That is the first thing this listener will hear. I said the Talking with Tarashuk podcast, who I am, what the show is, what we do, and since I have a guest, I introduce my guest. I didn't do any social plugs, but that's fine. I can do it at the end. So that's a cold open. It's always an option, and I hope you use it.
Yeah.
I actually do use it for every single one of my podcasts. I do both. I do a cold open and a pre-recorded intro. So go ahead, Christian.
I was saying, once you get used to it, then you can add color. You could throw a joke in or something like that. But
it takes practice.
Once it's a pitch essentially.
Yeah.
We're
looking at it.
But once you have the pitch down, then it becomes less robotic. It becomes more fluid, and you can build upon it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So our next intro is a pre-recorded intro, which is it's exactly what it sounds like. It is an intro that you pre-record, it's pre-produced, that you just pretty much stick in front of your recording. I think every podcaster has some sort of music and clips in their intro. It's a fun way for you to show off your skills, and it adds a much-needed flavor to your podcast. If someone is listening to your podcast for the very first time, this is their first impression, and you want to make it memorable. A pre-recorded intro should always cover the name of the podcast, the host, and general topics covered, as I've said before. So it's something that would fit into every podcast. It's pre-recorded with a music bed under it. I suggest no more than 60 seconds. Because if it's too long, people aren't going to care, right? They're just going to tune out. You don't want to throw too much information on them. They want to hear the guests they want to hear the interview with your guest, or they want to talk about Seinfeld, or they want to hear you complain about your wife, whatever. Doesn't matter. So, pros. The pros of this is that it makes your podcast sound more professional, right? It, like Christian, you're a very talented mixing and master. Like that Talking with Tarashuk intro you made for us.
Yep.
I can't tell you how many compliments I've got on that intro.
Oh, really?
Multiple. Because when I'm recording, I play the intro for them before we start. I go, just so you know, we are now recording. You're going to hear a brief intro, then we're going to hop right into it. So it gets them in the mood as well. So the pre-recorded intro, it gets me in the mood. It gets me going. It gets me pumped.
Because in reality, you're sitting in a room, but then once that music comes on, it's almost like the spotlight's there. Like, oh, this is for real now.
Yeah.
This is for real.
Yeah. It
sets the mood, the ambiance, the tone before you even get started.
It's part of my pregame ritual. So yeah, it makes me more professional, even on this silly goofball. It adds a set format to the podcast, so it's strictly organizational, right? Intro, how did a guest, first question, off you go. It's the gun that shoots off to start the race. So format is very important to any podcast. Like if you're just kind of talking, maybe if you have a guest, right? If you don't have an intro for your guest, they don't know when you're starting. I was a guest on someone's podcast, and I had no idea we were in the podcast until you asked me a question. I was like, oh, we're going right now? Oh, shit. Okay. And then we were in. So as a guest, it was very weird. It was very confusing. So you want to set that format. You want to set the pace with the pre-recorded intro. And it shows your audience what your show is about in a very unique way, right? Your intro is unique to your show. So, thing like that. The cons, though, it does add length to the podcast. And for returning listeners, they might not want to listen to the same intro over and over and over and over again because it can get annoying. But hey, that's what the plus 15 second, the plus 30 second button is there for. So it's a con, but it's not the end of the world. That's length, but it can be a little redundant, but whatever. And you need to know how to make it or have someone make it for you, which can be an expense. You can try and do what I did with some non-commercial music and put it in a multi-track in Audition or in Audacity or in free version of Pro Tools and just kind of figure it out in this mix and master on yourself. Or you can just pay, maybe $150, $200 for someone else to do it for you. If you don't know what you're doing and you're a business, I would say go with the latter and pay someone to do it for you. If you're an individual, I would say try it out or do or if you have the money, pay someone to do it for you. So that's pre-recorded. Christian, you did our Ambiguous Podcast Solution intro, which was recorded, mixed, and mastered here at Cube Recording Studios. So let's play that intro for everybody. Yeah, baby! This is the Ambiguous Podcast Solution, the podcast for podcasters. Stories told by everyday people as well as longtime professionals. Join a member of the APS team as they discuss the crazy world of podcasting. The only catch? We only speak to fellow podcasters. We will bring you the origin stories, the greatest hits, learning experiences, and the future goals of podcasts of all shapes and sizes. If you're listening to this, hopefully it will inspire you to start your own podcast, or it will inspire you to keep going and give you ideas on how to make your podcast better. If you have a podcast and want to be a guest on the show, please reach out to us at info@apspodcast.com for more details. Welcome to the Ambiguous Podcast Solution. Now let's get into it. Yep. All right, Chris, you can kill it. Yep, there it is. So, I kept that ending, that extra audio ending, in there because that also goes into our third intro, which is a combination of both. So, how I like to do my intros, I'll start with the music, front and center. I'll pot it down so I can talk over it. And then at the end, I'll pot it back up and then fade it out again. So when I do my live intro, I talk over the music bed. So that is why that intro is longer. It's like an extra 10, 15 seconds maybe at the end of just audio. So I'm doing it in post. I give my cold open. Hey, this is Will Tarashuk and APS Podcast Solution. Today I'm talking with Christian Wright, the host of the Cube Recording Studios podcast. And then we're talking, and that music is just slowly fading out and out and out until it gets to the end. So, like, that's a stylistic choice. That's something I like to do. It's something I've done with all my podcasts from the beginning. It's something I continue to do. Except for talking with Tarashuk, it kind of just ends abruptly. Because, yes, I know I have gray hair. But, for the most part, that is what I would do. But that intro had it all. You know, the Ambiguous Podcast Solution, this is what it is. Here's who we are. Because it's not just me hosting it. It's multiple people hosting it. Here's what I want you to get out of the podcast, and here's how you can reach us to get on the podcast. All that is in the intro. Not that I was smart. What do you think, Christian?
I mean, I recorded it. I edited. I thought it all came together. As I was listening there, I was like, okay, there's a little bit extra on this one, but you know, it's cool. It could fade a little bit more at the end, but I think that intro had it all. As you said, it's a combination of the two. It tells you exactly what we're trying to do. If you want to reach out, what our website is, the overall goal, and it's fun. You know, you get to hear some live sounding music in the meantime.
Yeah, and the music's loud at the end because from you, if you're playing it, you can fade it manually on your board, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh yeah, you're asking me.
Yeah, I'm asking you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So or if it's in post on Audition or Pro Tools, you can manually fade it out.
In manually
post.
fade it. Could throw a fade on it.
Yeah.
A lot of ways you could do it.
So the intro itself, when it was recorded, didn't need to be faded because I could do it during or in post. So.
Yeah, I don't think that version we just played wasn't the final version. So.
Yeah.
But you get the gist.
Yeah. So that brings us to the combination of both. So that intro plays. The music adds on to the ends, and I fade the music, and I talk over it. It's like an intro into an actual intro, because every episode, every podcast should have some sort of a live intro, because even if, like the Ambiguous Podcast Solution, I still need to introduce my guest, right? I still need to introduce myself, because I'm the one hosting this episode, so I still need some sort of a cold open. So, now I just made it a little cooler with some music under it. So that's why I do the combo. It's my personal choice. All my podcasts have some sort of pre-recorded intro with the music bed, and it goes into my cold open where I plug all my content, social media sites, etc. It essentially kills two birds with one stone. So the pros, it makes you sound very professional and informative, as well as creative, right? It creates a format of uniqueness since the pre-recorded is the same, but the cold is always different. So you're getting the exact same thing, but different.
Familiar but fresh.
Ooh, I'm going to use that. I'm going to write that down, familiar but fresh. And new listeners get a great first impression, right? So if they're newly listening to it, they're like, okay, I get it now. And then once the cold open comes in, they're like, oh, okay, who's I'm talking to? Or they can skip ahead, and they can go right into the cold open, and it's right there.
You're giving people an opportunity to judge a book by its cover.
Yeah.
And if your cover looks good, then that'll be an advantage. Kind of back to, should you do it yourself? Should you have somebody else do it? If you are capable, then do it. If you're a business, definitely have somebody else do it if you can't do it. But you're giving people to look at something shiny.
Yeah.
And if it's shiny and nice, then, people may tune in just for that reason. And then if your podcast is interesting, it's fun, it's entertaining, then that's another reason.
And all the cons are the same, right? Show length, repeating information, and you gotta get it made. So, same thing, but hey, man, this is podcasting. You gotta stick out. You gotta be competitive. So, let's give an example of the combo of both. So, Christian, play us the. You know what? Don't do the you. Don't want to do you mad bro. Yeah, no, do the you mad bro because I like the you mad bro. Play the. No, it's not you mad bro. Might be American Minutes. I don't know. Whichever one I sent you, that isn't KOTR. Play that one.
Gotcha.
Those of this show are not experts. All information discussed and debated on the show is publicly available, and the opinions of the hosts are not fact. We apologize for any offense you may take and discourage any message of hate, violence, and discrimination, but such messages may be repeated from reportedly original sources for purposes of debate and discussion. We encourage your involvement in the discussion, but do not support any similar aforementioned message. You're listening to American Minutes.
Okay, it was American Minutes.
Is that Nash?
It is Nash. Well, look who's back from vacation, Mr. Nash, looking all bright and tan with your Hawaiian shirt. But all right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back on the clock after a week hiatus. We in hiatus port? Where are we? Hiatus. We are back for another fun-filled episode talking all about housing. We're gonna do a super duper deep dive into the current state of the housing market, but where would I be without my partner in crime, Mr. Nash Moore? Rested and refreshed. Nash, how was Disney, my friend? I love you. I missed you.
Easy breezy, beautiful cover girl.
All right, so I faded out there at the end, but you get the gist. So what we did there, we were covering American Mans was a political podcast, so it's covering current event news and politics. So we were going to step on some toes, so we add that disclaimer in the beginning, just saying like, hey, we might say some things you don't like on this podcast, so you have been warned. So that was our intro. And then we went into the music. That was a cold open. You can see I screwed up saying hyenas or whatever I said. But the music, the point I wanted to play that was the music. It started out with the remix version of the national anthem, which we had made for us. And it started out and dun, dun. And it goes, oh, say. Then I fade it and I talk over it. Right? So, but in the national anthem, this plays out until the end. So me and Nash are talking. And once it fades out, it's out. So that is an example of a combo of both, where you have the disclaimer, which takes place of our intro, and then we just get right into it. Make sense?
I also think it's a stylistic choice.
Very stylistic.
I mean, because you could have said something satirical right there, but you said something. Nash ended up saying something serious.
Yeah.
Because you could have been like, we're probably gonna piss you off while you're listening to this podcast, but continue listening. You could have done anything there, but I see what you did there, to let people know that might step on some toes.
Yeah. So he wrote and recorded that. Let's do the King's of the Rings one, because so what we do now for Kings of the Rings, and this is two music beds. So we have our preview where Ricky. I honestly don't know if he writes these out or if they're off the cuff, but we start off with a actual preview song. And then he gives a monologue saying, come up on Kings of the Rings podcast, like a preview. And then we go into our main theme, fade it, and then our individual intros. So his intro is him as a host, as well as the show. Mine is me as a host and whatever my shenanigans I have. And then Kay Murphy with their shenanigans, whatever they have. So this clip's a little longer. It's probably about 2.5 minutes. But let's play that. Yep.
Midnight music.
Coming up this week on Kings of the Rings podcast, as if Extreme Rules wasn't crazy enough, Bray Wyatt highlights a massive list of returns and surprises across all brands in WWE. Plus, Jon Moxley and Jericho sign extensions. We get our first glimpse of WrestleMania in Philly. MJF and William Regal have a promo for the ages, and WWE is going back to college. Oh yeah, by the way, we're also going to preview Halloween Havoc. We got 2 weeks of crazy wrestling news to talk about, and we're going to start it right now. So put on your hats as if you are a wrestling god from JBL, because it's Kings of the Rings Podcast, episode 313, banger after banger after banger, exclusively on Wrestle Addict Radio, and it starts right now.
Music fades up. New song. Not a clean cut, but it's okay. And then it pods down.
Oh, I'm so happy the Yankees won last night.
Yeah, it's not going to be an easy 7 games, though, with Houston.
No, it's not going to at all, but we'll be here for all of it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Kings of the Rings Podcast, episode number 312, 313. I forgot what fucking episode this is.
312, baby.
312. Well, I'll say it's 312. I might have said 313 in the intro, but whatever, my bad. Banger after banger. We were not able to do a show last week due to same.
So yeah, you get the gist, right? So that's also a stylistic choice. That was Vicky's idea. He says, let's do a preview, and then go into our cold open. That's a great idea. So, if you know you're going to a wrestling podcast, let's preview what we're going to talk about, and then from there we just talk about who we are and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So those are all different ways you can introduce your podcast. and it's stylistic. There's no right or wrong answer. It's really up to you for what you want to do. The last thing we got to talk about this episode, although, is music. Each of those intros had music. Now you can get music made. Someone like Christian, you do make your own music. You can do a whole video on that and how all that works and pricing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
You can find royalty-free music, but
tons of royalty-free stuff.
You got to be careful with that, though, because this because it's royalty-free in 2022 doesn't mean it's going to be royalty-free in 2025. So that is something you do have to be careful about. But the best case scenario is to get it made, right? Someone like a professional studio or someone who makes music. Like we had a friend, Luke. His friend did remixes, so we had the national anthem remix. So he did it by himself. So we own that; it's original.
Yeah.
So
that was dope.
Technically, he owns it, so he gave us permission to use it. Yeah, it's amazing. I still have it on my mixer in case I need it. But it makes it podcast sound amazing. I always start with I like to talk about that. So yeah, music. You need it, but be careful. And you can be creative with it, like how my stylistic choice outro. We also, when Ricky closes the show, he's like, all right, well, let's get out of here. Hit that outro. We have outro music. It plays for about a few seconds. I part it down. He gives the outro. I give my outro. Kay gives their outro. We give our tagline at the end where we tell one of our fans to F off. And then I fade the music up, let it play, and I slowly fade it out. Right? That's just a stylistic choice that I like for my podcast because music can really add and make your podcast different. I haven't seen many podcasts actually do the way I do it. I think it's very radio-ish, like talk show radio. But that's how I like to do my podcasts.
There's a certain aesthetic to the voices, the mixing not being perfect. You know, you listen to AM radio, it's way fuzzier than FM. And there's just a certain aesthetic, a certain radio to it. Clips playing in the background, sound beds, little clips of people saying things. And I think, that's kind of like you said, you did it like very talk show radio. I mean, I think that hits the nail on the head. And it sounds cool and it sounds exciting. It's not something stagnant. There's things coming in, there's things coming out, there's fading in, there's fading out. Sometimes the last one you showed, there was a switch up mid thing. Like these are the type of things that happen on radio.
Yeah, sometimes I'm pretty clean with the switch.
Right.
Like, from that one, I was like, I can hear exactly
even
when the song
it not
switched.
being clean, there's some value in that. It's like, if it was clean, yeah, it would still be unexpected, but it's way more unexpected if it's not as clean. So I mean,
I guess, yeah.
guess.
Thanks, make me feel better. But yeah, so that's our episode this week. That's the tutorial for this round. Your first episode covers the who, what, where, when, why of your podcast. The intro, you got to introduce it somehow. So get creative. I have had a lot of fun with my intros over the years. I wanted to play so many more, but it would have been redundant and annoying, and we got to get out of here. So next time...
Should have done the unknown, unnamed nonsense.
We don't have an actual intro for that, though.
Well,
when we're live, we have a live intro, because that's just a segment on... we got to create an intro for that, too. We should create one of those for unknown, unnamed nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, we had a functional.
Oh no, we did record one, didn't we?
Well, we had one over two different. It might have been Talking with Tarashuk intro.
Yeah,
the one that we've been playing.
Yeah,
Up All Night. That one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that one.
Yeah, that one.
I like that one.
I love that one too.
Yeah.
I mean, I've told that story. I don't know story on the podcast so many times how the intro was made. So go find that Talking with Tarashuk podcast anywhere every podcast can be found, including YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. So yeah, end of the show. Plugs. Next time this is released, I don't know. It's gonna be mostly video. So if you've been listening on only audio, our next one, because now we are actually in production. So we're going to have a lot of video clips in one long video tying it all together of how to set up all this equipment, how to frame up your shot. Because, if I'm sitting here like this, there's a lot of problems with that. If I'm sitting here, like this, there's even more problems to that. So we're gonna show you how to frame up your shot. We're going to show you how to set up this arm extender, how to set up this mic, how to set up this little pop filter so you can get your P's. We're going to show you how to record. I'm going to show you how to record in Audition. Christian's going to show you how to record in Pro Tools, from the basics of literally how to open it up on your computer, from there to how to export it as an MP3 file. I'm going to talk about framing, headspace, setting up equipment, a lot of videos. So the next podcast is mainly going to be video. There's going to be nothing released on the audio feed other than reminding you to go watch the videos. So that'll be on YouTube and Biggest Podcast Solutions, as well as Talking with Tarashuk YouTube channel as well, if you want to find it there. But my name is Will Tarashuk. T as in Thomas. ARASHUK. That's also another tagline, Christian. Me spelling my name like that.
Yeah, it is. Every episode.
Yeah, that's been a day one. That's been a day one thing on my podcast. I've always been my name T as in Thomas.
Lucky it has that many letters, man. It wouldn't have flowed the same way.
Yeah, if you're like Christian, W is in William.
WRI
GHT.
Well, you can make it work. You can make it work. But
so there's a story behind that. That's another tagline. How I spell my name. So, yeah. Anything you want to say, Christian, before we go off?
No, I think we wrapped it up. Pretty much talked about all the different things, intros, the pros and cons of the different kinds of intros, music. I'm a music guy. I love music. I think it's fun. I think it's entertaining. Gives some ear candy. But that's just preference. You can always just go with the cold open.
All right. And you can always go with the cold outro. Most of my podcasts have cold outros, but King's Rings has music. But this one is cold. So we'll see you next time. But until then, y'all take care. See the beat? I did the beat. Always do a beat.